sometimes the most extraordinary stories belong to the most ordinary-looking people. They walk past us every day, in coffee shops, on subway platforms, in grocery store aisles, carrying secrets that could change everything. Maya Rodriguez was one of those people. For 28 years, she perfected the art of invisibility, choosing oversized sweaters and keeping her head down. She had learned that blending in meant staying safe, that anonymity was her armor against a world that had once tried to break her. But some stories refuse to stay hidden forever. Some truths demand to be seen, no matter how carefully we try to bury them. And, sometimes, it takes just one moment of courage, one decision to roll up a sleeve, to transform not just your own life, but the lives of countless others. This is the true story of how a tattoo became a bridge between two worlds, how silence gave way to voice, and how one woman's decision to stop hiding changed everything she thought she knew about herself and her purpose in this world. Maya Rodriguez had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. Every morning, she would pull on her oversized gray cardigan, the same one she had worn for 3 years to her job at Morrison & Associates accounting firm. The sleeves were long enough to cover her wrists, the fabric thick enough to hide the curves of her body, and the color dull enough to blend into any background. She had learned that being unremarkable was a survival skill. The subway ride to downtown Chicago was always the same. Maya would find a seat in the middle of the car, never at the ends where people might notice her, and she would keep her eyes fixed on her phone screen, scrolling through the same news articles she had already read twice. The commuters around her changed daily, but Maya remained constant, a ghost among the living, present but unseen. At 28, Maya had perfected this routine so completely that her coworkers barely acknowledged her existence. She arrived exactly at 8:30 every morning, sat at her desk in the corner of the office, and processed insurance claims with mechanical precision. Her supervisor, Janet, would occasionally drop files on her desk with a mumbled thank you, but most days, Maya worked in complete silence. She ate lunch alone at her desk, stayed exactly until 5:30, and then reversed her morning commute home to her studio apartment in Pilsen. This was how Maya had lived for the past 6 years, ever since she had graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in accounting that she had never wanted. The choice had been practical, safe, unremarkable, everything that Maya had trained herself to be. But, beneath the gray cardigan, beneath the carefully constructed facade of normalcy, Maya carried a secret that burned against her skin every single day. The tattoo had been her act of rebellion at 19, done in a small shop in her hometown of Guadalajara during what was supposed to be a family visit. But that visit had turned into something else entirely, something that Maya had spent the last 9 years trying to forget. The image wrapped around her left forearm like a living thing, intricate and beautiful, telling a story that Maya had never been able to share with anyone in her American life. It was a traditional Mexican design, but not the kind that tourists pick from flash sheets on the walls of beachtown parlors. This was something deeper, more personal. The central image was a monarch butterfly, its wings spread wide and detailed with such precision that each individual scale seemed to shimmer with life. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding the butterfly were symbols that told Maya's story: a small church representing her grandmother's faith, a mountain peak for the village where she was born, and, intertwined among them all, faces. The faces of people she had lost, people she had left behind, people who had shaped her in ways that no one in Chicago could ever understand. The tattoo artist, an old man named Eduardo who worked out of his living room, had taken 3 sessions to complete the piece. He had listened to Maya's story with the patience of someone who understood that tattoos were not just decoration, but documentation. He had captured her pain and her hope in ink and needles, creating something so personal and powerful that Maya had never been able to bear showing it to another living soul. Maya's American life had begun when she was 18, fresh out of high school and desperate to escape the violence that had consumed her neighborhood in Guadalajara. Her parents had scraped together every peso they had to send her north, to Chicago, where her cousin Elena had promised to help her get established. The plan had been simple: Maya would work, send money home, and eventually bring her family to safety. But life had other plans. Within 2 years of Maya's arrival in Chicago, the drug war that had been simmering in Guadalajara had exploded into something unrecognizable. Her father, who ran a small grocery store, had been caught in the crossfire, not because he was involved, but because he was in the wrong place when 2 rival cartels decided to settle a dispute with bullets instead of words. Maya's mother had called her at 2 in the morning, Chicago time, her voice broken and hollow as she delivered the news that would change everything. Maya had wanted to go home for the funeral, but Elena had stopped her. The situation was too dangerous, too unstable. Maya's mother agreed, begging her daughter to stay safe in America, to build the life they had all sacrificed for. So Maya had grieved alone, in a studio apartment that suddenly felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The tattoo had come later, during Maya's single trip back to Mexico for what they all knew might be the last time. Her mother had aged 10 years in the two since Maya had left, and her younger brother Carlos was talking about joining the military as his only escape route. The family Maya had left behind was disappearing, one piece at a time, and Maya felt the weight of survivor's guilt pressing down on her like a physical thing. Eduardo had understood all of this without Maya having to explain every detail. He had seen enough young people carry the weight of two worlds on their shoulders to recognize the signs. As he worked, he had told Maya stories of other clients, other immigrants who came to him seeking a way to carry their homeland with them permanently. The tattoo wasn't just art, he explained, it was a responsibility. It was a promise to never forget, never let go, never stop being who you really are, no matter how far you travel or how much you have to change to survive. But surviving in Chicago meant hiding that promise under long sleeves and silence. Maya's co-workers knew she was Latina, but they treated her like she had sprung into existence the day she started working at Morrison & Associates. They never asked about her family, her story, her dreams beyond processing insurance claims. Maya had learned to let them believe whatever they wanted about her background, finding it easier to be a blank slate than to risk the complicated conversations that the truth might bring. The invisibility had become addictive in its own way. There was a strange comfort in being unknown, in having no expectations placed upon her beyond showing up and doing her job competently. Maya could move through her days without having to perform, without having to be anything other than functionally present. It was a kind of freedom, even if it was a lonely one. But, on the morning that would change everything, Maya's carefully constructed world began to show cracks. She was running late, a rarity that threw off her entire routine. The alarm hadn't gone off, her coffee maker had malfunctioned, and she had grabbed the first shirt she could find, forgetting to check that it was one of her long-sleeved options. It was only when she was already on the subway, surrounded by the familiar faces of her fellow commuters, that she realized her mistake. The shirt was short-sleeved, cotton, and blue. And, for the first time in 6 years, Maya's tattoo was visible to the world. She tried to pull her bag higher on her shoulder, to position it to block the view of her forearm, but the damage was done. Across the aisle, an elderly Latino man had noticed. His eyes had found the familiar symbols, the traditional artistry, and Maya watched as his expression shifted from casual boredom to recognition to something that looked almost like relief. He didn't say anything, didn't approach her or even acknowledge what he had seen directly. But, for the remaining 10 minutes of the ride, Maya felt the weight of being truly seen for the first time in years. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure, like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing that you might actually want to jump. When Maya reached her stop, the old man was getting off too. As they walked up the stairs toward street level, he fell into step beside her, and, in Spanish so gentle it almost sounded like a prayer, he said, "Que hermoso trabajo." Eduardo still works out of his house on Maple Street, doesn't he? Maya stopped walking. The question hit her like a physical blow, not because it was intrusive, but because it was impossible. Eduardo's shop had been tiny, tucked away in a neighborhood that most people never had reason to visit. The chances of a stranger in Chicago recognizing his work were astronomical, unless... "You're from Guadalajara," Maya said, and it wasn't a question. The man smiled, and Maya saw decades of the same careful hiding she had perfected, the same weight of carrying two lives in one body. "Section Reforma," he said, naming a neighborhood that had been swallowed by violence long before Maya was born. "I left in 1987, but Eduardo did my first tattoo when I was 16. I'd recognize his work anywhere." They stood on the busy Chicago sidewalk, two strangers connected by ink and memory and the particular loneliness of people who had learned to make themselves invisible. Maya realized that her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being recognized. Not just seen, but recognized for who she really was beneath the gray cardigans and careful silence. I have to get to work, Maya said finally, because she didn't know what else to say, because the moment felt too big and too fragile to trust with more words. The man nodded, understanding. Me too. But... He hesitated, then reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. There are others like us, you know. People who carry their stories on their skin. People who remember. He pressed the card into Maya's hand. If you ever get tired of carrying all that beauty alone. Maya looked down at the card. It was simple, cream-colored, with just a name, Roberto Mendez, and a phone number. But, on the back, hand-drawn in what looked like permanent marker, was a small butterfly. Not identical to the one on Maya's arm, but clearly related, part of the same visual language of home and memory and survival. As Roberto walked away, disappearing into the crowd of morning commuters, Maya stood holding the card and feeling like something fundamental had shifted in her carefully ordered world. For 6 years, she had believed that her invisibility was her strength, that blending in was the same as belonging. But, in that moment, on that busy street corner, with her tattoo burning bright against her skin in the morning sunlight, Maya began to understand the difference between hiding and healing. She was 15 minutes late to work that day, the first time in 6 years that she had deviated from her routine. Janet noticed, commenting with surprise that Maya seemed different today, more. She couldn't find the word she was looking for, but Maya knew what it was. More present. More real. More like the person she used to be before she learned that survival meant disappearing. Maya spent the entire day acutely aware of her exposed forearm, expecting someone else to notice, to comment, to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. But her co-workers remained as oblivious as ever, seeing only what they had always seen, the quiet woman in the corner who processed claims and never caused trouble. It wasn't until Maya was alone in her apartment that night, holding Roberto's business card and staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, that she realized the most important person who had seen her tattoo that day was herself. For the first time in years, Maya looked at the intricate artwork on her arm not as a secret to be hidden, but as a story waiting to be told. For 3 weeks, Roberto's business card lived in Maya's wallet like a secret within a secret. She would touch it sometimes, running her finger along the edge while she sat at her desk processing insurance claims, or while she waited for the subway at the end of another identical day. The hand-drawn butterfly on the back had started to fade slightly from her repeated handling, but Maya couldn't bring herself to stop looking at it. The encounter on the sidewalk had changed something fundamental in Maya's daily routine, though she couldn't quite name what it was. She still wore long sleeves to work, still kept her head down on the subway, still ate lunch alone at her desk. But there was a restlessness growing inside her, a feeling like she was wearing clothes that no longer fit properly. The gray cardigan that had once felt like armor now felt like a costume, and Maya caught herself wondering what would happen if she just stopped putting it on. The wondering became dangerous on a Tuesday in October, when Maya woke up to find Chicago wrapped in an unexpected heat wave. The temperature was supposed to reach 85 degrees, far too hot for the long-sleeved shirts that had become her uniform. Maya stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, holding a short-sleeved blouse in her hands and trying to talk herself into the courage to wear it. In the end, she compromised. She wore the short sleeves, but she brought a light jacket that she could put on once she reached the office. It was a small rebellion, but it felt enormous as she walked to the subway station with her tattoo exposed to the morning air. The heat made everyone on the train irritable and sluggish, pressed together in the artificial coolness of the air-conditioned car. Maya found herself squeezed between a businessman reading emails on his phone and a young woman with earbuds, everyone lost in their own private worlds. It should have been easy to remain invisible, just another anonymous commuter trying to get through the day. But visibility, Maya was learning, was not always a choice. "Excuse me," said a voice to her left, and Maya looked up to see a woman about her own age, with kind eyes and the same careful posture that Maya recognized in herself, the stance of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "I hope this doesn't sound weird, but I noticed your tattoo, and I just had to ask, is that Eduardo's work?" Maya's heart stopped. This was her worst fear and her deepest hope all at once, being seen, being recognized, being asked to account for the story written on her skin. The woman was clearly Latina, but there was something in her accent that suggested she had been born here, that she belonged to the generation that Maya sometimes envied for their easy bilingual confidence.
You know Eduardo?
Maya managed to ask, her voice barely audible over the sound of the train. The woman smiled, and Maya saw relief flood her features. My grandmother took me to him when I turned 18. She said that Eduardo was the keeper of stories, that he could help me carry my family's history even when they weren't with me anymore. She glanced around the crowded train car, then made a decision.
Can I show you something?
Without waiting for Maya's answer, the woman pushed up the sleeve of her light sweater, revealing a tattoo that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. It was different from her own, but unmistakably from the same artistic tradition. A sacred heart surrounded by roses, but incorporated into the design were symbols that told a specific story, a small outline of El Salvador, a coffee plant, and, woven throughout, the same attention to faces and memory that Maya recognized from her own piece. I'm Carmen, the woman said, extending her free hand while keeping the other sleeve pushed up. And I've been riding this train for 2 years, looking at people and wondering if anyone else was carrying their stories the way I am. Maya shook Carmen's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of work, of struggle, of the particular roughness that came from building a life with your own hands. Maya, she said, and then, because the moment seemed to demand more truth, from Guadalajara originally. My family's from San Salvador, Carmen replied. Well, my grandparents were. I was born here, but my abuela made sure I knew where I came from. She said that forgetting was the real death, worse than anything that could happen to your body. The train was pulling into Maya's station, but she found herself reluctant to leave this unexpected conversation, this sudden oasis of recognition in her carefully constructed desert of anonymity. Carmen seemed to sense her hesitation. Look, Carmen said quickly, I know this is forward, and I know you don't know me, but there's a group of us that meets sometimes. People with Eduardo's work, people who understand what it means to carry your history on your skin.
Would you ever want to?
Maya thought of Roberto's business card, still sitting in her wallet, still waiting for her courage to catch up with her longing. Yes, she said, surprising herself with the speed and certainty of her answer.
Yes, I think I would like that very much.
Carmen smiled like Maya had just given her a gift.
Here's my number.
We're meeting this Saturday at a community center in Pilsen.
Nothing formal, just sharing stories, I guess. Remembering together instead of alone.
Maya took Carmen's number and stepped off the train in a daze, clutching the piece of paper like a lifeline. As the train pulled away, she saw Carmen through the window, still smiling, and Maya realized that something irreversible had just happened. She had been invited into something, welcomed into a community she hadn't even known existed. The rest of the day passed in a blur of insurance claims and routine tasks, but Maya's mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about Carmen's words, remembering together instead of alone. For 9 years, Maya had carried her memories in isolation, treating them like a burden too heavy and too personal to share.
But what if they weren't supposed to be carried alone? What if the weight of them was meant to be distributed among people who understood? That evening, Maya did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother in Guadalajara.
The conversation was stilted at first, full of the careful small talk that had replaced their once easy intimacy. But then, Maya's mother asked about work, about life, about whether Maya was taking care of herself, and something in her voice, the familiar melody of love and worry, broke through Maya's defenses. Mommy, Maya said, switching to Spanish without thinking about it, I met someone today who recognized Eduardo's work.
There was a long pause on the other end of the line.
Maya's mother had been with her when she got the tattoo, had held her hand during the first session when the pain was almost too much to bear. It had been her idea, actually, this permanent record of everything they were afraid of losing. That's good, Mija, her mother said finally, and Maya could hear the careful hope in her voice. You've been carrying all of this alone for too long.
It was never meant to be a secret. It was meant to be a bridge.
Maya had never thought of her tattoo that way, but as soon as her mother said it, she knew it was true. The symbols Eduardo had etched into her skin weren't just memories, they were a language, a way of communicating with others who shared the same complicated relationship with home and belonging and survival. Saturday came faster than Maya expected, and, with it, a crisis of confidence that had her changing clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a simple t-shirt. She had decided to leave her arms uncovered, to let Eduardo's artwork speak for itself, but, standing outside the community center in Pilsen, Maya felt exposed and vulnerable in ways she wasn't prepared for. The building was small and unassuming, the kind of place that served as a neighborhood anchor without drawing much attention from the outside world. Maya could see people inside through the windows, a mix of ages and backgrounds, all gathered in what looked like a casual circle of folding chairs. She almost turned around twice before she finally found the courage to walk through the front door. The conversation stopped when Maya entered, but not in the uncomfortable way she had feared. Instead, it felt like the pause that comes when a story reaches an important moment, when everyone needs to pay attention to what happens next. Carmen saw her first and stood up with a smile that made Maya feel like she had just come home after a long journey. "Everyone," Carmen said, "this is Maya, the woman I told you about. The one with Eduardo's butterfly." Maya looked around the circle and saw a dozen faces looking back at her with expressions of curiosity and welcome. There were men and women, young and old, but they all had the same look in their eyes that Maya recognized from her bathroom mirror, the weight of carrying stories that were too big and too important to keep locked away forever. "Maya," said a voice from the back of the room, and Maya turned to see Roberto standing up, the same man who had given her his business card on that sidewalk 3 weeks earlier. "I was hoping you'd find your way here." The next 3 hours passed like a dream. Maya listened as person after person shared the stories behind their tattoos, the journeys that had brought them to Eduardo's living room, the ways they had learned to carry their histories in a country that often seemed determined to make them forget where they came from. There was Maria, whose tattoo honored her grandmother who had raised 6 children while working in the fields of California. There was David, who carried the image of a church that no longer existed, destroyed in an earthquake that had claimed half his family. There was Anna, barely 25, who had convinced Eduardo to tattoo her father's handwriting on her shoulder, a line from a letter he had sent before the cancer took him. Each story was different, but they were all variations on the same theme: love and loss, memory and survival, the particular courage it took to make yourself visible in a world that often preferred you to disappear. And, slowly, as the afternoon wore on, Maya found herself ready to add her own voice to the chorus. When it was her turn to speak, Maya stood up on shaking legs and rolled up her sleeve. The butterfly seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light filtering through the community center windows, and Maya heard several sharp intakes of breath as the full intricacy of Eduardo's work became visible. "This is my father," Maya said, pointing to one of the faces woven into the design. "He died in Guadalajara when I was 20, caught in violence that had nothing to do with him. And this," she touched another part of the tattoo, "is the church where my grandmother prayed for all of us every single day until she joined him." Maya's voice broke, but she kept going. "I got this tattoo because I was afraid I would forget. But I think I've been so afraid of forgetting that I forgot how to remember. I forgot that memories are supposed to be shared, not hidden." When Maya sat back down, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then, Roberto spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "The thing about Eduardo's work," he said, "is that it's never really finished until it's seen. Until it's witnessed. You've been carrying all of this alone, but you were never meant to." Carmen reached over and took Maya's hand, squeezing gently. "We meet here every other Saturday," she said. "Not to fix anything or solve anything, just to remember together. To make sure none of our stories get lost." Maya nodded, feeling something tight in her chest finally beginning to loosen. For 9 years, she had believed that assimilation meant erasure, that belonging in America required her to abandon the parts of herself that were inconveniently foreign. But, looking around the circle at these faces, some familiar, some strange, all carrying their own complicated relationships with home and belonging, Maya began to understand that there was another way. She could belong here and remember there. She could build a new life without discarding her old one. She could be visible without being vulnerable, seen without being stripped of the right to define herself. As the meeting broke up and people began to say their goodbyes, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the warm, complicated feeling of being part of something larger than herself. These people understood her tattoo not just as artwork, but as autobiography. They saw the butterfly and recognized the story it told, the journey it represented, the courage it had taken to make her history permanent. Walking home through the familiar streets of Pilsen, Maya made a decision that had been building inside her for weeks. On Monday morning, she would go to work without the gray cardigan. She would let Eduardo's butterfly see daylight, and she would let herself be seen in return. Not because she was ready for all the conversations that might follow, but because she was finally ready to stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. The decision felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure, like standing at the edge of a cliff and, finally, understanding that sometimes, jumping is the only way to learn how to fly.
Monday morning arrived with an unseasonable warmth that felt like a sign from the universe.
Maya stood in front of her closet, staring at the gray cardigan that had been her armor for 6 years, and made the conscious decision to leave it hanging on its hook. Instead, she chose a simple blue blouse with 3/4 sleeves that would leave Eduardo's butterfly clearly visible to anyone who cared to look. The subway ride felt different without the familiar weight of fabric covering her arms. Maya found herself sitting straighter, occupying space in a way she had forgotten was possible. Other passengers glanced at her tattoo, some with curiosity, some with appreciation, some with the kind of recognition that spoke of their own hidden stories. But, for the first time in years, Maya didn't feel the need to shrink under their gaze.
The real test came when Maya walked into the offices of Morrison & Associates.
She had worked there for 6 years, processed thousands of insurance claims, attended dozens of meetings, and eaten lunch at the same corner desk every single day. Her co-workers knew her as the quiet woman who never caused problems, never asked for anything beyond her basic salary, never drew attention to herself in any way. They were unprepared for the version of Maya who walked through the door that morning.
Janet noticed first, her eyes immediately drawn to the intricate artwork that wrapped around Maya's forearm.
"Maya," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise that bordered on shock, "I had no idea you had, is that a tattoo?" Maya had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times over the weekend, but she had never quite decided what she would say when it finally came. Looking at Janet's face, not judgmental, just genuinely curious, Maya found herself speaking from a place of truth she had kept locked away for too long.
"Yes," she said simply. "It tells the story of my family in Mexico."
It was done by an artist who specializes in preserving memories. Janet leaned closer, her eyes taking in the butterfly, the faces, the symbols that Maya had carried in secret for so long. "It's beautiful," she said, and Maya heard genuine appreciation in her voice.
"I mean, really beautiful. The detail is incredible. How long did it take?"
Maya felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of anxiety she had carried into the office.
3 sessions, she said.
The artist, Eduardo, he listened to my whole story before he even picked up his needle.
He said that tattoos aren't just decoration, they're documentation.
Word spread through the office with the particular speed that accompanies any deviation from routine. By lunchtime, Maya found herself surrounded by co-workers she had worked alongside for years but had never really talked to. They asked questions, respectful ones, curious ones, questions that revealed how little they had known about the woman who sat in the corner and processed their claims with quiet efficiency.
"I always wondered about your background," said Marcus from the filing department. "I mean, I knew you were Latina, but I never wanted to pry, you know?"
But this, he gestured toward Maya's tattoo, this tells a whole story. Maya found herself talking about Guadalajara, about her father's grocery store, about the violence that had torn her family apart and the hope that had brought her to Chicago. She talked about her mother, still living in Mexico, still waiting for the day when it would be safe for Maya to come home for more than just brief visits. She talked about Eduardo and his living room studio, about the way he had helped her transform her grief into something permanent and beautiful. The conversations continued throughout the week, transforming Maya's workplace from a space of anonymous productivity into something that felt almost like community. Her co-workers began sharing their own stories, immigration experiences, family histories, the complicated relationships they all had with the idea of home. Maya realized that she hadn't been the only one hiding parts of herself behind professional politeness. But the real change happened outside the office, in the ripple effects that came from Maya's decision to be visible. At the grocery store, an elderly woman approached her in the produce section, speaking rapid Spanish and pointing to Maya's tattoo with tears in her eyes. She had recognized one of the symbols, a small image of the Virgin of Guadalupe that Eduardo had incorporated into the design, and wanted to share her own story of faith and survival. On the subway, Maya found herself in conversations with strangers who saw her tattoo as an invitation to share their own experiences with art and memory and the ways people choose to carry their histories. A construction worker showed her a tattoo on his shoulder that honored his grandfather, a welder who had helped build some of Chicago's most famous skyscrapers. A college student pulled up her sleeve to reveal delicate script in Arabic, her grandmother's favorite prayer tattooed along her wrist. Maya began to understand that her tattoo was functioning exactly as Eduardo had intended, not as a secret to be hidden, but as a bridge connecting her to others who understood the weight of carrying multiple worlds within a single body. Each conversation was a small act of recognition, a moment when strangers became less strange because they had glimpsed something real and vulnerable in each other. The Saturday meetings at the community center became the anchor point of Maya's week, the place where she could fully inhabit all the parts of herself without explanation or apology. The group had grown since her first visit, as word spread through Chicago's Latino community about the safe space they had created for people carrying Eduardo's art and the stories it represented. There was Javier, a chef whose tattoo honored his grandmother's recipes, each dish represented by a small, detailed illustration that captured not just the food but the love that had gone into preparing it. There was Isabella, a teacher who had convinced Eduardo to tattoo her daughter's footprints on her shoulder, the daughter she had lost to leukemia at age 5. There was Roberto's son, Miguel, barely 18, who carried his father's story alongside his own on his back, a massive piece that traced their family's journey from poverty to stability across 2 generations. Each person brought their own interpretation of Eduardo's artistic language, but they all shared the same understanding of what it meant to make your history visible in a society that often preferred immigrants to arrive without baggage, without complications, without the messy realities of human experience. Maya found herself becoming something of an unofficial ambassador for the group, the person that newcomers were drawn to because she remembered what it felt like to hide, to be afraid of being seen. When Carmen brought her cousin Sofia to a meeting, a young woman still struggling with the decision to get her own memorial tattoo, Maya was the one who sat with her afterward, answering questions and sharing the story of her own journey from invisibility to presence. "I'm scared," Sofia admitted, her hands shaking as she showed Maya the sketch she had commissioned from Eduardo. It was a portrait of her brother, killed in El Salvador during the ongoing violence that had driven her family north. "What if people judge me? What if it makes things harder?" Maya looked at the sketch, recognizing Eduardo's distinctive style in the way he had captured not just the brother's physical features but something essential about his spirit. "It might make some things harder," Maya said honestly. "People will see you differently when you're carrying your story on your skin." "But, Sofia, they'll see you as you really are, not as who you think you're supposed to be." "And that changes everything." Sofia got her tattoo 3 weeks later, and Maya was there when she unveiled it at the community center, tears streaming down both their faces as the group welcomed another story into their collection of memories made manifest. The ripple effects of Maya's visibility extended far beyond her own life. At Morrison and Associates, her openness about her background had prompted the company to start a mentorship program for first-generation college graduates, recognizing that many of their employees were carrying similar stories of family sacrifice and cultural navigation. Janet had asked Maya to help design the program, acknowledging skills and perspectives that Maya hadn't even realized she possessed. Maya's mother visited from Mexico that Christmas, the first time she had traveled to Chicago since Maya had moved there. As they walked through Pilsen together, Maya's mother stopped frequently to look at the murals that decorated the neighborhood, the public art that celebrated Latino culture and history in ways that Maya had learned to see but not appreciate during her years of trying to blend in. "This is like your tattoo," her mother said, pointing to a massive mural that depicted the journey of immigrants across generations. "Art that tells the truth, art that refuses to let people forget." She turned to Maya with tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Nija. For learning to carry your story with courage instead of shame." Maya's relationship with Eduardo deepened as well. She began visiting him regularly, not for new tattoo work but because she had come to understand that he was more than just an artist, he was a keeper of community memory, a translator between the language of experience and the vocabulary of visual art. He told Maya about the hundreds of people he had tattooed over the decades, each one carrying a piece of shared history into the world.
you know what I've learned?
Eduardo said during one of their conversations, his hands working on a new piece for a young man who wanted to honor his grandfather's military service.
People think tattoos are about the past, about preserving what's already gone. But, really, they're about the future.
They're about making sure that the next generation knows where they came from, knows that their story is part of something bigger. Maya began documenting the stories of Eduardo's clients, conducting interviews and taking photographs with their permission, building an oral history project that she hoped might eventually become a book or exhibition. Each conversation revealed new layers of the immigrant experience, new ways that people had found to maintain connection to their origins while building lives in a new country. The project caught the attention of local historians and community activists, leading to Maya's first public speaking engagement at the Chicago History Museum. Standing in front of a room full of strangers, Maya felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that had once kept her hidden. But, when she began talking about Eduardo's work, about the community that had formed around shared recognition and mutual support, the nervousness transformed into something that felt like purpose.
For years, Maya told the audience, I believed that assimilation meant erasure. I thought that becoming American required me to stop being Mexican, that success meant leaving my history behind.
But, what I've learned is that the opposite is true. The more fully I embrace where I come from, the more completely I can participate in where I am now. After the presentation, Maya was approached by representatives from several universities, community organizations, and cultural institutions who wanted to learn more about her documentation project. The quiet woman who had once processed insurance claims in anonymity found herself becoming an advocate for immigrant stories, a bridge between academic research and lived experience.
Maya's transformation was not without its challenges.
There were still moments when visibility felt dangerous, when the wrong comment or sideways look reminded her why she had learned to hide in the first place. But, she had learned to distinguish between momentary discomfort and genuine threat, between the awkwardness of being different and the actual danger of being vulnerable. The community center meetings had evolved into something larger, a network of support that extended far beyond the original group of Eduardo's clients. They organized cultural events, provided mentorship for recent immigrants, and created safe spaces for people to share their stories without fear of judgment or exploitation. Maya found herself at the center of this growing community, not as a leader in any formal sense, but as someone who had made the journey from hiding to healing, from invisibility to advocacy. Her tattoo had become exactly what Eduardo had envisioned, not just a personal memorial, but a public declaration of the right to take up space, to be seen, to insist that immigrant stories were American stories too. 3 years after that first subway encounter with Roberto, Maya stood in front of her bedroom mirror getting ready for another day at Morrison & Associates. But, the gray cardigan remained untouched in her closet, replaced by a wardrobe that reflected all the parts of herself she had learned to integrate. The butterfly on her arm caught the morning light, its wings spread wide, carrying the weight of memory and the promise of flight. Maya no longer thought of herself as someone who had learned to blend into the crowd. She had become someone who understood that true belonging didn't require disappearing, it required showing up fully, stories and all, trusting that there was space in the world for the truth of who she was. Her tattoo had changed everything, not because it had transformed her, but because it had reminded her of who she had always been beneath the careful camouflage of survival. The butterfly was still there, still beautiful, still carrying the faces and symbols of everything Maya had loved and lost and found again. But now it flew in daylight, visible and proud, a testament to the power of art to preserve truth and the courage it takes to let that truth be seen.